in general now it's thought that it takes about 16 to 17 years to discover, from when you start working on a drug project until the drug goes to market. And on average it's about $1 billion. And it's probably going to be higher than that as we move forward. And like Dr. Slayman, everybody that I worked with was totally convinced that what they worked on was the cure for whatever disease they were working on. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm, and it is really hard when decisions are made and you often don't agree with them, but they have to make choices about certain things. So it's kind of an interesting story, and I having a hard time actually figuring out how, I mean, drug companies, you can't do some of the things that they did in there. You don't hand select who's going to be in your clinical trial and things like that. And actually, unless it's changed more recently, if you're in a trial and you do well in an early study, even if you don't get selected for a later study, which oftentimes you don't because you've already been exposed, there's ways that people can get those medications. So that even before they're approved, if you had success with that, there's avenues to do that. And Dr. Schwartz may know more about that. But so it's not that if you start, even if a drug doesn't get approved, even in the process, there's times where that drug can be used for the population where it was really successful. And then the only other comment, I don't want to take up too much time, is everything's a risk-benefit. All drugs have side effects. They're not like water, and so it's always the risk of what, and that's the one thing kind of bothered me when he was saying there's no side effects. There's no such thing as no side effects. There's always going to be side effects, but you're just hoping that the benefit is much greater than the risk. And in this case, there was a genetic basis, so they can have greater benefit in the population you're picking.
I'd like to mirror a lot of those same comments. You know, movies are meant to glorify things in different ways. You know, part of the truths of what we saw in phase 1 trials, which is where drugs are initially tried in humans, and I have a lot of background in that, specifically working in San Antonio, Texas, which I was fortunate to be part of a group of drug development that actually leads the country. And so for every one success, unfortunately, there's probably dozens, if not dozens upon dozens of failures, unfortunately. And you know, Herceptin did change the face of how we treat cancer in the sense of these antibodies. But as Dr. Swick said, you know, there are side effects that come with all of our drugs, and what they didn't talk about is in the original trials, several of the trials, a lot of cardiac disease was seen in that phase 3 trial that they didn't get into detail about. Up to a quarter of women had some type of heart dysfunction from being on the trial. And so all those things have to be taken into consideration. And that's a lot of reason why a lot of our drugs that look promising either never make it, or it takes years for that to actually get approval. So it is a very, very complicated process. And Herceptin and another drug called Rituxan, which is also made by Genentech for lymphoma, are probably the two drugs that have changed the face of how we treat these cancers. More than probably any other drugs we've had seen combined over the last 20 or 30 years. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen just a slew of new drugs that have been approved, mostly oral drugs, which are more convenient. One of our members in the audience is a recipient of an oral drug that's been wonderful for her disease, but it does come at a price of side effects as well. Cost was not talked about at all. Cost of running the trials, but the cost of these drugs are exorbitant. And as time goes on, we're going to have to face these challenges of how we're going to pay for these drugs. And insurance companies, are not going to be able to afford everybody receiving these drugs. If your benefit is only a few weeks or a lot of colleagues, they only showed him, but there's a lot more people that are behind what happened. Dr. Swick knows that, Dr. Young as well. Those are the people that really are behind discovering the drug, and he probably got the benefactor of getting most of the publicity, but the people behind the scenes should have been shown a little bit more.
I was just going to, one other comment I was thinking about is that the one thing that happens in drug discovery, every drug that's made it to market has died at least several times during the process. There's never really, it's not a clear winner. I can't think of any cases where right from the get-go, you know, like this was it. Usually something happens, and even the blockbusters that have made it to market, Lipitor is an example, that was stopped in development because for certain reasons, because of competition and things like that. But most things, most drugs that make it were the way we would determine it, we would say they were killed at some point, and then they come back to